Brothers and sisters, we are living in dangerous times, times where truth is treated like a crime, and a man who dares to speak it is marked for death. But I am not afraid. I was born into a world that denied me my humanity, and every breath I've taken since has been a fight to claim it back. I stand here not because I love life less, but because I love freedom more. And freedom does not come to the patient, it does not come to the polite. It comes to those who demand it with their words, with their actions, and, if necessary, with their blood. Understand this: the enemy is not across the sea alone, the enemy is here. The enemy smiles, shakes your hand, and tells you to wait for change that will never come. They give you promises with one hand and chains with the other. But the day of waiting is over. We will no longer beg for dignity. We will no longer bow our heads. We will no longer die quietly. Freedom must be demanded, not begged. When we speak of freedom, we are not talking about a gift. We are not talking about a favor that one man can grant another if he feels generous enough. Freedom is the natural right of every human being, yet history shows us that those who have oppressed others have never given it up willingly. They clutch it with both hands, they defend it with weapons, they build systems to ensure that only they and their children can enjoy it. And in doing so, they leave millions outside suffering in chains both visible and invisible. To believe that those chains will simply be loosened because we politely ask, because we wait patiently at the table for crumbs, is to believe in a lie. Freedom does not work that way. It has never worked that way. It must be demanded, it must be seized. When people beg for freedom, they reduce themselves to the role of supplicants. A beggar depends on the mercy of another. A beggar waits for the master to decide when he has given enough. But freedom is not mercy. Freedom is not charity. If you beg for it, you acknowledge the authority of the one who enslaves you. You admit that he has the power to decide your destiny. And once you do that, you have already surrendered your claim. That is why no oppressed people in history have won their liberation by begging. They won it by refusing to accept subjugation. They won it by standing up, speaking out, fighting back, and demanding what was theirs by birthright. There are those who will tell you that patience is the path to freedom. They will tell you that if you wait long enough, the conscience of the oppressor will awaken and justice will trickle down like water. But generations have waited. Fathers have waited, mothers have waited, children have waited, and the graves of the dead are filled with those who waited for justice that never came. Patience in the face of oppression is not virtue, it is surrender. It is the slow death of a people who refuse to rise. Demands, on the other hand, awaken power. A demand is not a plea. A demand declares that we will no longer tolerate chains on our hands, feet, or minds. It declares that we are willing to risk comfort, safety, even life itself, to take what belongs to us. A demand unsettles the oppressor because it strips away his illusion of control. When the oppressed demand freedom, they change the balance of power. They no longer stand in the posture of a slave, but of a man, a woman, a people who will not bow. To demand freedom means to accept the consequences of resistance. It means to prepare ourselves to endure hardship, rejection, and violence, because history has shown that no oppressor releases his grip without a fight. But to fear that fight is to accept the chains. To demand freedom is to say, we will pay whatever price is required. Some will be asked to pay with their reputation, others with their livelihood, others with their very lives. But the cost of submission is always greater, for submission is a slow death stretched over generations. To live without freedom is to exist as property, as labor, as tools for someone else's ambition. To die in the struggle for freedom is to die as a man, not a slave. Those who believe in begging will tell you that making demands invites danger. They will whisper that it provokes hatred, that it makes enemies. But hatred already exists. Enemies already surround us. The danger is already here. Silence only makes it invisible. Begging does not protect us, it weakens us. It convinces us to shrink ourselves, to swallow our anger, to soften our words, until the world no longer sees us as men and women, but as shadows. Demanding freedom is the only way to force the world to see us fully, to acknowledge our presence, to reckon with our power. When a people rise and demand their freedom, something stirs not only in their oppressors, but also in themselves. Demanding freedom transforms the spirit of the oppressed. It ignites courage in the fearful, strength in the wary, unity in the divided. A people who once bowed their heads begin to walk tall. They look one another in the eyes and see brothers and sisters instead of strangers. The act of demanding awakens dignity that years of submission had buried. It teaches a man to value his life, his family, his future, not as something to be granted, but as something to be taken hold of and defended. The struggle for freedom is not just against the oppressor, it is also against the chains in our minds. Generations of being told we are less, of being told we must wait, of being told we must beg can poison the spirit. But when we demand freedom, we cleanse ourselves of that poison. We tell ourselves that we are worthy of life, worthy of justice, worthy of dignity, and that no man has the authority to deny us those things. That demand becomes a declaration of who we are, and it shapes how we move, how we speak, how we live. To demand freedom is also to understand that it is not for the individual alone. A man may win small victories for himself, but true freedom belongs to the people as a whole. A demand for freedom is not selfish. It is collective. It is the voice of the many rising against the few. It is mothers demanding for their children, workers demanding for their brothers, the poor demanding for the future of their community. It is the understanding that one man's liberation means little if his people remain in chains. That is why demands cannot be quiet. They cannot be hidden. They must be loud, clear, undeniable. They must ring through the streets, through the halls of power, through every institution built to hold us down. They must be repeated again and again, until even the deaf ears of the oppressor are forced to hear. And if hearing is not enough, the demand must be backed with action. A demand without action is only a cry. A demand with action is a revolution. The enemy offers promises with one hand and chains with the other. Throughout history, the oppressed have been given promises dressed in the language of hope. They are told to wait, to trust, to believe that change will come through laws, through speeches, through the goodwill of those who hold power. Every generation hears the same words: be patient. Progress is coming. The system is changing. These promises sound sweet to ears that have been hungry for justice, but behind them lies the iron of control. A promise from the oppressor is not a gift of freedom. It is a tactic of delay. While one hand extends empty words, the other hand tightens the chains that bind the people. This has always been the way of oppression. To soothe with illusions while securing domination. The chains do not always clink like metal. Sometimes they are chains of poverty, chains of ignorance, chains of fear. Sometimes they are laws written in fine print, rules enforced in shadows, systems so deeply woven into society that they become invisible. The enemy speaks of opportunity, but only within limits. He speaks of equality, but only in appearance. He gives you a seat in the room, but denies you a voice at the table. And when you complain, he points to the promise as if it were progress, saying, you see, you have come so far. Be grateful. The promise is used to blind you to the fact that the chains remain unbroken. The cruelty of this deception is that it teaches the oppressed to doubt their own suffering. It whispers that if progress has been promised, then any failure must be their fault. If equality has been declared, then inequality must be imagined. If justice has been written into law, then injustice must be exaggerated. In this way, the promise does not merely deceive, it silences. It convinces the oppressed to question their pain, to mistrust their voices, to accept their condition as something less urgent, less real. All the while, the chains grow heavier. The oppressor knows that promises are cheaper than bullets, safer than confrontation. A promise costs nothing but words, yet it buys time, it calms anger, it divides movements. While the oppressed wait for the fulfillment of promises, the enemy continues to build wealth, strengthen power, and solidify control. The longer the promise lingers, the more it becomes a substitute for freedom itself. People begin to measure progress not by what has been gained, but by what has been said. The speech becomes more important than the reality. The appearance of inclusion becomes more important than true liberation. The chains are painted gold, and the people are told to admire their shine. Promises are also used to divide the people. The enemy will tell one group, your time has come, while whispering to another, be patient, your turn is next. In this way, he sets the oppressed against each other, each clinging to their piece of a broken promise, each competing for a place at the table of illusion. Some will accept the crumbs and declare them progress, while others are left starving. This division ensures that the people do not rise together to break the chains, but instead argue over the size of their shackles. The enemy is clever. He knows that an outright denial of justice would expose him for what he is. So instead he cloaks himself in the language of justice. He speaks of liberty, democracy, equality, but his actions betray him. He builds institutions that preserve his dominance, and when they are questioned, he points back to the promises written on paper as if words alone could erase centuries of chains. This hypocrisy is the greatest weapon of the oppressor, to pretend to be a friend while remaining an enemy, to smile while tightening the rope. The promises of the enemy are not merely lies, they are weapons. They disarm the oppressed by replacing anger with hope, urgency with patience, action with waiting. A promise is a chain of the mind. It convinces you to stay seated when you should rise, to stay quiet when you should speak, to endure when you should resist. That is why the oppressed must learn to see through promises, to measure progress not by what is said, but by what is lived. Freedom cannot be promised into existence. It must be fought for, claimed, secured by the hands of those who refuse to live in chains. The hand that offers the promise is the same hand that controls the chains. It may appear open, generous, inviting, but its other hand holds the key and refuses to use it. The oppressor offers promises not because he intends to free you, but because he fears what will happen if you free yourself. He hopes the promise will keep you waiting long enough that your fire cools, that your will breaks, that your children inherit the chains as if they were natural. The promise is meant to lull you into sleep while the enemy continues his work in daylight. Every generation of the oppressed must decide whether they will be fooled by promises or awakened by reality. Those who cling to promises grow old waiting, passing their hope like an inheritance to children who also grow old waiting. The chains survive because the people have been convinced that patience is progress. But those who see the truth, those who understand that the hand of promise is also the hand of chains, begin to rise. They refuse to wait. They refuse to be silenced by empty words. They know that a promise is not a door, it is a lock. And the only way to open it is not to wait for the key, but to break it apart with their own strength. A man who won't fight for his own life isn't fit to live. Life is the most sacred possession a human being has, yet it is also the most disrespected when lived without dignity. To be alive without freedom, to walk with breath in your lungs but chains on your hands, is not living, it is existing. A man who refuses to fight for his own life accepts that existence. He accepts the role of a shadow, a tool, a body that moves at the will of others. Such a man has surrendered the very essence of what it means to be human. For life is not measured by years alone, but by the spirit that demands its right to be lived fully, freely, and without submission to tyranny. The instinct to fight for life is written into every creature. A bird will struggle when caged, a beast will claw against its hunter. Even the smallest insect resists being crushed. Nature itself declares that survival demands struggle. So when a man blessed with mind, strength, and voice refuses to fight for his own life, he falls beneath even the smallest creature. He becomes something unnatural, something broken, something trained to accept death while still breathing. Those who refuse to fight often do so because fear has conquered them. Fear of punishment, fear of pain, fear of loss. But fear does not remove the danger. It only ensures that the danger will consume them without resistance. The oppressor feeds on fear, grows strong from it, and uses it as a weapon sharper than any blade. Fear convinces the man to stay silent while his dignity is stripped away. Fear convinces him to bow his head, to shuffle his feet, to thank his master for crumbs that fall from the table. But when fear governs life, that life no longer belongs to him. It belongs to the one who controls his fear. To fight for one's life does not always mean to raise a weapon or to shed blood. It means to stand, to speak, to resist, to refuse the chains no matter how heavy they are. It means to say, I will not be treated as less than a man, less than a woman, less than a human being. The fight takes many forms, but the refusal to fight is always the same. It is surrender. And surrender in the face of oppression is not peace. It is death stretched over time, the slow suffocation of a spirit that was born to be free. A man who does not fight for his life endangers not only himself, but also those who come after him. Children learn from what they see. And if they see their fathers and mothers bowing to oppression, they too will bow. They inherit not just chains on their hands, but chains in their minds. They are taught that resistance is futile, that survival means submission, that dignity is too costly to pursue. In this way, the cowardice of one generation becomes the burden of the next. Refusing to fight for your own life is not merely personal weakness. It is betrayal of those who will follow. The oppressor knows this well. He does not need every man to surrender. He only needs enough to teach the lesson of fear. He needs examples of obedience, men who will lower their heads so that others will see and copy them. The oppressor uses such men as living proof that resistance is unnecessary, that survival can be achieved through submission. But survival without dignity is not survival at all. It is slavery disguised as peace. A man who refuses to fight is not preserving his life. He is preserving his chains. History honors those who fought, not those who surrendered. The names remembered, the voices that echo through generations are those who stood against the odds, who refused to be broken even when the cost was high. Men and women who chose to fight for life gave meaning to their existence, even if they did not live to see the victory. Meanwhile, those who bowed are forgotten, buried not only in the ground but in silence. They live, perhaps, but they never truly live. To fight for one's life requires courage, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. Every man feels fear when confronting danger, but only those who overcome it earn the right to call themselves free. Courage is the fire that turns the will to live into action, that transforms breath into strength, that takes the frailty of the body and makes it mighty. A man who refuses to fight extinguishes that fire. He lets the cold hand of fear smother it until nothing remains but ashes. There is also a moral responsibility bound to the fight for one's life. A man who refuses to defend himself invites his oppressor to continue his crimes. By not resisting, he grants silent permission to be abused, exploited, and dehumanized. In this way, refusal to fight is not neutral. It strengthens the oppressor. It encourages further oppression, because injustice unchallenged grows like a disease. To fight, even if the struggle seems unwinnable, is to declare that injustice will not pass unnoticed, unchallenged, unanswered. The worth of life is proven by the willingness to defend it. If a man values his life so little that he will not resist those who seek to control it, then his life is already lost. The act of fighting, whether with words, with unity, with defiance, or with force, shows that life is sacred, that freedom is sacred, that dignity is sacred. The refusal to fight sends the opposite message, that life under chains is acceptable, that the oppressor has the right to rule, that the slave accepts his condition as natural. A man who accepts this forfeits the respect of others, and worse, forfeits the respect of himself. A man who won't fight for his own life isn't fit to live, because life itself demands struggle. Every breath is a fight against death. Every heartbeat is resistance against silence. To give up that fight is to deny the very nature of existence. It is to live as if one is already dead, to walk as a shell without spirit, to move without purpose. Life is meant to be lived with strength, with defiance, with the constant refusal to accept chains as normal. A man who will not fight has abandoned this purpose and stands as proof that the oppressor's chains are stronger than his will. The movement and its truth cannot be silenced by death. A man can be struck down, but an idea cannot be buried. Flesh and bone may fall to bullets, blades, or prisons, but the spirit of truth has no grave. The oppressor believes that by destroying the messenger he can destroy the message. But history has proven him wrong every time. Empires have crumbled, tyrants have vanished, but the words of those who dared to speak against injustice continue to rise from their silence. Death can claim the body, but it cannot chain the truth. Once it is spoken, once it is heard, once it is planted in the minds of the people, it becomes a seed that grows even in blood-soaked soil. The power of truth lies in its ability to outlive those who carry it. A single voice may tremble, a single man may fall, but truth echoes. It is repeated by the witnesses who heard it, carried by the hearts that believed it, passed from one generation to the next like fire from a torch. Even when the flame bearer is struck down, the fire continues to spread. That is why the oppressor fears the word more than the weapon. He fears that if the people hear it, if they understand it, if they believe it, no amount of violence will be able to silence it. The movement cannot be assassinated because it does not belong to one man. It belongs to the people who embrace its truth. When the enemy kills, he reveals his weakness. Violence against a man of truth is not a show of strength, but a confession of fear. It means the argument has been lost, the illusion has been broken, the mask has slipped. The oppressor strikes the body because he cannot strike the truth. He silences a voice because he cannot answer it. He hopes that by cutting down the tree he can erase the forest. But he forgets that roots run deep. Those roots are the people, and the people remember. The more violently the oppressor attacks, the more he exposes the righteousness of the struggle. Death does not erase the cause, it sharpens it. Truth is dangerous because it demands recognition. Lies can rule for a time, but truth gnaws at the foundation of lies until they collapse. When truth is spoken in the face of oppression, it strips away the disguise of justice that the oppressor wears. It reveals chains where freedom was promised, exploitation where equality was claimed, blood where peace was declared. Once people see this truth, they cannot unsee it. They may deny it, they may fear it, but it will live inside them, waiting for the moment when they are ready to act. That is why death cannot silence truth. It has already entered too many minds to be erased. Every martyr is proof that death cannot end a movement. For when a man falls in the struggle for freedom, his life becomes a testament. His blood becomes a testimony. His absence becomes a presence more powerful than his body ever was. People who were hesitant, people who were fearful, people who were silent, see the cost that was paid and are forced to ask themselves whether they will continue to live as slaves while others have died for freedom. The martyr's silence becomes a roar that calls the living to rise. The oppressor misunderstands death. He thinks it is final, that it closes the book, that it ends the story. But for the oppressed, death is a chapter that gives birth to new voices, new leaders, new movements. One voice silenced gives rise to 100. One body fallen gives rise to 1,000 marching feet. The oppressor kills a man, but in doing so, he multiplies the message. The people say, if they feared him enough to kill him, then what he spoke must have been true. And the truth becomes stronger, sharper, heavier with the weight of sacrifice. A movement rooted in truth does not depend on one leader, one speaker, one face. Leaders are important, voices are necessary, but the movement belongs to the people. The truth flows through them. It shapes their vision. It fuels their defiance. When one is taken, others step forward. When one is silenced, others speak louder. When one is buried, others rise from the ground. This continuity is what makes truth undefeatable. It is not tied to a single life, but to the collective spirit of a people who refuse to bow. The attempt to silence through death also reveals the desperation of the oppressor. If ideas could be crushed by reason, they would not need to be crushed by bullets. If truth could be refuted, it would not need to be assassinated. Violence becomes the weapon of last resort when every other attempt to hide or twist the truth has failed. And every time the oppressor resorts to violence, he confirms the very message he sought to silence, that justice is absent, that oppression rules, that freedom must be taken by force. In this way, death does not end the movement. It vindicates it. Truth is eternal because it speaks to what is human. It speaks to the cry for dignity, the hunger for justice, the thirst for freedom. These are not desires that can be killed with a bullet or chained in a prison. They are the lifeblood of every generation. When one generation falls, the next inherits the struggle. When one leader is silenced, the next finds his voice. The truth flows like a river, bending, twisting, sometimes hidden beneath the surface, but always moving, always pushing toward the ocean of freedom. A man may be forgotten, his name erased from history books, his face hidden from photographs, but the truth he spoke cannot be erased. It lingers in the songs of the people, in the stories of the elders, in the whispers of the oppressed, in the rising anger of the young. It reappears in moments of crisis, when the chains tighten too much, when the promises run dry, when the patience of the people shatters. Then the truth returns with new voices, new energy, new strength, as if the dead themselves were speaking through the living. The movement and its truth cannot be silenced by death, because death is a moment, but truth is a force. Death ends a life, but truth shapes history. Death takes a body, but truth takes root in the soul of the people. The oppressor can kill the man, but he cannot kill the meaning of the man's struggle. He cannot kill the vision of freedom that lives in the eyes of every child, in the hearts of every family, in the voices of every people who refuse to accept chains as destiny.